of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about how we think is what we become in relationship to consciousness is experience. Listen as we explore the three modes of modal thought as the son of perdition and the operations of divine mind as the truth of being. In this podcast, we will discuss resolving the physical body into a mental image capable of receiving divine inspiration by linking the form to the mind. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and rest in eternal peace. Swami, the title of today's podcast is It's the Thought That Counts. Can you just give us a description of what the inspiration was behind this title?
Yeah, I grew up with the saying, it's the thought that counts, especially when evaluating the worth of a gift. When I Googled the phrase, it's the thought that counts, it comes up with the original aphorism. It is not the gift, but the thought that counts, coined by American professor, writer, and clergyman Henry Van Dyke, Jr. And this happened in the early 20th century. The proverb highlights the kindness and intention behind a gift are more important than its monetary value, especially when the gift itself is disappointing and unsuitable. So today we'll look at the concept of changing how we think about persons, places, and things by piercing through the sense testimony and abiding in the truth, the divine creation, which is everywhere always, without doubt or opposition.
Swami, for preparation of today's podcast, I had done some research, and I have two quotes here I want to get your thoughts about. The first one is by Swami Vivekananda. I'll read it. We are what our thoughts have made us, so take care about what you think. Words are secondary. Thoughts live, they travel far. End of his quote. And then I do have another one here from Mahatma Gandhi. A man is but the product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. End of his quote. And I know you've been saying for years how we think is what we become. So can we give your thoughts about these two quotes I just read?
Yeah, what we want to start to understand, the physical body is a manifestation of the mortal mind. And the mortal mind works in contrast, in duality. So the physical appearance is the manifestation of this process we call thinking, forming thoughts and opinions about information coming through our corporeal senses. However, what we're not acknowledging is what we now know to be the truth. The truth isn't visible and tangible, and it's not invisible but tangible. The truth is invisible and intangible. The truth is spirit, and spirit doesn't think, so to speak, but we could say things like, or let divine mind do its thinking in your awareness. So what we have done in these classes is we've made a distinction between thought, which is dualistic, and idea, which is absolute. Spirit is whole, it's complete, and can't be divided. Start to educate our thought up to this understanding that includes the absolute with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image, so that we can eventually walk reason through the open door of revelation.
So you said that we were going to take a look at the concept of changing how we think about persons, places, and things. Well, let's get started with that. You said we have to, by piercing through this sense testimony and abiding in truth. What does that look like? How do you think we should get started doing that?
In order to start to grasp the magnitude of divine science, you have to start with an understanding. We see what isn't here, and we are blind to what is here. The only reality is spirit, which is invisible and intangible to the mind we're using to get us through this lifetime. And so we have to develop the faculty that will enable us to perceive the divine creation. That's going to be a process. We will have to be born again of spirit, learn how to control how we think, eventually learn how to stop thinking and make the mind an avenue of awareness for the divine creation, which is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. In that silence and stillness, conscious awareness of the activity of the divine principle, watch, we wait, we listen for divine mind to reveal itself to us. So it's a two-part authentication. I must be conscious of the divine principle, and divine mind then acknowledges itself as me. Now, until we have this birth of Christ in consciousness, we work with thought and belief. But as long as we know by thinking, we're working with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image, and also we're under the law of karma. Anything we do with human will and personal sense can be done for good or for bad. In fact, all of our good intentions, with them come a complementary, unmanifested bad intention. So it's a trap. And a big part of developing this awareness and sensitivity for the divine principle is being able to recognize the difference between the unreal, which is persons, places, and things, and the real, which is purely spiritual.
So let's dive a little bit deeper with what you've been saying for years, how we think is what we become.
Yeah, now what we have added is, do you know there are 3 modes of mortal thought and the operations of divine mind? And these are simultaneously influencing the human experience continuously. I think of that Christmas carol, "Do you see what I see?" Let's talk about the phrase thinking differently as a developable skill. What Mrs. Eddy called to think with God as God, because God thinks in the absolute and mortals think in duality or the rational. James called this double-minded and suggested making thine eye single. What Mary Baker Eddy called prayer is communion with the divine. In this state of oneness, what Jesus called I and the Father are one, where we graduate from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis. We now begin to understand ourselves in the way that we are created, which is spirit. This can't just be a declaration, I am spiritual. You must know yourself to be perfect and understand yourself to be whole, complete, which means there is no trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, or even asking. Spirit knows the truth. Spirit rests in the knowledge of the divine creation, held, controlled, and governed by the perfection of being. Spirit rests. My peace, the peace that passes human understanding.
Let's explore more about the three modes of mortal thought, and let's also include about the son of perdition as well.
Yeah, in the Bible, they refer to this as born of woman, born of man, born of spirit. There's a progression that takes place in development where we graduate from instinct, appetite, preservation, and survival. We move out of fear-based motivation. We develop our psychological organs, and we begin to learn how to make decisions based on a value system that's in accordance with universal order. And then, of course, we learn how to overcome the influence of the world mind. The son of perdition is world mind functioning as corporeal sense in human consciousness. There's nothing intrinsically evil about this. In fact, it has absolutely no power of its own. Spirit is the only self-existent power in this universe. Everything else gets its appearance of power from belief. We believe we are a finite mortal being. We believe in sickness, suffering, disease, lack, limitation. God did not make any of these things. In fact, God is running a perfect universe everywhere, always. What we are looking at is our human concept about it. It is driven by a belief in two powers. We start to learn truth in consciousness dissolves the mental material world of energy in the same way light dispels darkness. Jesus said, "Know the truth and it will make you free." The truth is the divine creation, freedom from the belief in mortality, the law of karma, material law.
Let's talk more about piercing through the sense testimony and abiding in the truth. What does that look like when we're doing those?
Well, first of all, we want to try and know the truth. In order to know the truth, we need the mind of Christ. But until we have this birth of Christ in consciousness, until we have initiated this developmental process, we can start with a belief in the divine creation. You want to know that God is not a mix of good and bad, no God or right. God does not reward and punish. God is absolute goodness. Then you want to be a faithful witness to that divine principle. Even though you are not conscious of it, you can walk by faith and not by sight at this point. The main difference between what I would call orthodox religion and divine science is orthodox religion leaves you at the level of belief. You can believe it or disbelieve it, but it doesn't go any further than that. Divine science is provable. So your belief in this divine principle must start to have an effect on the testimony of your senses. This is when your belief graduates to faith. You can test what it is you think the divine principle is. Conscious awareness of divine truth resolves things into thoughts and exchanges the objects of sense for the divine idea. We're looking for this coincidence between the human and the divine. All the good, beautiful, and true attributes belong to the divine principle. If what's appearing in your corporeal senses doesn't have the divine quality, then you immediately know you are not conscious of the divine principle. You can still remain a faithful witness. But as it says in Revelation, I come quickly. You don't want to continue to do the same thing expecting a different return here. You want to learn how to shift your thought, learn how to make these adjustments, move through these modes of mortal thinking, and make your mind an avenue of awareness for the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. Then watch, wait, listen, and let divine mind do its knowing in your awareness, and then look for that coincidence.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness. Starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So may I have a verse here from Matthew 6:25, and I'll read it. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment? End of the verse. Swami, I'd like to get your insights on this verse.
Yeah, this idea of linking the device to the app. In today's technologically advanced world, we have some valuable metaphors to help us understand how the human mind-body complex actually works. I have a bicycle computer which tracks my distance, speed, time of day, average speed, temperature, elevation, which are some of the things I understand that it does. I couldn't figure out how to change the reading from metric to imperial, and found out the indicator was in the profile of the app. Simply changing the option to imperial changed everything from kilometers to miles, from meters to yards, feet, and inches. So here we want to start to understand we can't put an infinite mind in a finite form. So we must learn to resolve the physical form into a mental image capable of receiving divine revelation. Herb Fitch told us, we are to know we are Christ, not in the world, while appearing as forms in the world. I changed that to forms because there seems to be many of us, but there's only one Christ. And that Christ is the only reality. We are just a reflection of that divine mind. Now, in order for us to link the physical form to a mental image capable of receiving divine revelation, we use the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle, which gives you something visible and somewhat tangible that you can latch onto, the idea of the body of Christ. In order to put this infinite mind in a infinite or seemingly much bigger body than a physical form on the planet, makes this doable. And what's important is that it includes all of the different facets that have to be upgraded to meet the divine standard so that we can now stop thinking and start knowing.
So we have a passage here from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 552, line 19, and I'll read it. But thought, loosened from a material basis, but not yet instructed by science, may become wild with freedom and so be self-contradictory. End of the line. Swami, your thoughts?
Yeah, please check me on this. There cannot be Christ identity and human anything. We live in human thought and we have human experiences. But when we know divine mind, we live in divine idea. Then we have divine experience. Truth dispels the lie. There is no human life. Anybody can say that. But for you to know yourself spiritually, we have to resolve this physical form into a mental image capable of receiving divine revelation, which means we have to come out of time. Time is measured in now and then. We have to come out of space. Space is measured in here and there. Come out of concept and form, belief and matter, thinking and movement or change. Come out of human will and personal sense. And if we don't purge ourselves of all of these erroneous concepts, theories, and beliefs, then our chance of knowing ourselves is diminished enormously because we must be pure of thought, pure of heart. And the only thing pure is divine idea. Human thought, even your best thought, is a mix of good and bad.
So, Swami, how does how we think is what we become relate to consciousness experience?
How we think is what we become. What we started to understand is with thought and belief, we can change finite bad to finite good. However, consciousness is experience. Divine truth in consciousness reveals the divine creation. We must be conscious of this divine principle, and thinking about it is not the same. So you can use the testimony of your corporeal senses as the check engine light on the dashboard of your consciousness. We know if we are sick, suffering, we are experiencing lack, limitation, we know we cannot be conscious of the divine principle. But the other thing is, all the good, beautiful, and true attributes belong to the divine. But just because you are having a good day and you don't have any pain in your physical form may not mean that you are conscious of divine truth. So you can use consciousness as your litmus test. Because when we think with the corporeal senses, we are under the law of karma, driven by the universal belief in two powers. When we cast out world mind, functioning as corporeal sense in consciousness, we stop thinking with duality. When we begin knowing the unified state of divine perfection, this is the real thought that counts. When spirit is cause, creation is perfect. As it says in the Bible, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. As long as we are doing it with human will, personal sense, doing it with thought, we are in the cycle of death and rebirth. To help prevent the betrayal of world mind functioning as corporeal sense in individual consciousness, by casting out the belief in a mortal sense of existence, we have something from Jolla Series by Herb Fitch, Class 3B, Principles to Neutralize World Thought.
And I'll read it. Now, let's look at these principles. The first, the greatest principle you can know is actually the first commandment given by Jesus Christ Only now we're going to phrase it in another way, a way that I hope you will find easy to remember. And this principle is, God is your spiritual identity. That's the first principle. The second principle is, God is the spiritual identity of your neighbor, whether your neighbor is a person, an animal, or a tree. You will discover that these two commandments can open the gates of heaven on earth. If understand and faithfully practice them, you will be living, moving, having your being in God, honoring God supremely, loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. You'll be walking in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Within yourself, you must know and practice that God is your spiritual identity. God is the spiritual identity of everyone and everything. God is everywhere as the spiritual identity of everything you see. You cannot look anywhere without the inner realization that behind what you see, whatever it is, the spiritual identity there is God. That is omnipresence accepted. Doesn't matter now if it's an A-bomb or a tidal wave, a flood, fire. It's not up to you to stop these disasters. It is up to you to accept the invisible spiritual identity behind the universe, behind every appearing thing, and then let infinity reveal itself, and you will discover that you have touched the magic button of truth. End of the quote. Swami, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a tough act to follow. When you talk about piercing through the veil, the important thing for us now is to learn that we must practice what it is we already know. Practice makes perfect when practice is perfect. Keeping your mind in constant relation with the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence is what you want to do. Fill your thought with the divine idea and become more of a faithful witness to that which your corporeal senses has no idea is there. And as you learn to trust, right where there seems to be problems, the only thing that is here is the love of God, the peace, the love, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, temperance. And you learn not to react to the testimony of your corporeal senses. And you are resting in the knowledge that God is running a perfect universe. Then you start to see how your belief in that divine principle starts to affect the testimony of your senses, where you are starting to see the coincidence between the human and the divine. And the more you rely on the invisible, intangible omnipresence, the more you trust it, the more you know what you are seeing with your corporeal senses isn't quote unquote real, then the better your human experience will start to appear to be. But none of this is guesswork. We must first link the physical form to the mental image that is capable of receiving divine revelation. And then trusting that, resting in that knowledge, we let divine mind exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea. And we do this without trying or even asking, but resting in the knowledge. God is perfect everywhere, always.
Swami, thank you for your insights for today's podcast. It's the thought that counts. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons to press to further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and rest in eternal peace. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.